Okay. So Joe DiNunzio is the executive, as I said, executive director of the Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, as well as a professor of practice at the Graduate School of Management. He's a senior executive with more than 3 decades of creative, technical, and business leadership, creating new ventures and building successful organizations. Currently, Joe is the president of FIDO Management, a partnership that provides strategic counseling to corporate and early stage clients in business, product, and market development. His prior entrepreneurial experience includes CFO and board member of Harebrained Schemes, an independent game developer, chairman, CEO, and co-founder of 42 Entertainment, a digital advertising and alternative reality game agency, and co-founding CEO of Z.com, a venture-backed digital media studio and network. He also has extensive corporate experience, including serving as senior vice president of new product development at Walt Disney Imagineering, where he led the global development of theme park concepts and digital media initiatives. Vicky Lee is a lawyer with more than 25 years experience in DLA Piper's technology, sourcing, and commercial group. She focuses on the representation of emerging growth in public companies and complex technological and commercial transactions in the technology sector and others. She's also a double alumna of UC Davis, having completed her bachelor's and law degrees at the university. Vicky has extensive experience in developing strategies to protect, license, and exploit clients' intellectual property assets. Her practice includes structuring, drafting, and negotiating complex commercial and intellectual property agreements, such as license agreements for patents, software, copyrights, trademarks, and trade secrets, agreements for product distribution, and manufacturing and purchase and supply agreements. And I should say here that DLA has been one of the Institute's most generous sponsors over the years. So thank you, Vicky, and thank you, Joe. Joe, I'll let you take it from here.
Oh, it's outstanding. Thank you, Jillian. So welcome, everyone. I am going to jump right into my presentation. I'm going to talk for about plus or minus 30 minutes. But you should feel free to drop questions into chat, and I'll periodically pause and address those, and then make sure we have time at the end to talk about anything that came up in our conversation on what I'm sharing, or anything that you think would be helpful as you prepare for the little bang, the big bang. Then we'll take a couple-minute break, and I'll turn it over to Vicky. Vicky's presentation is unbelievable. All joking aside, probably the most valuable thing you're going to do this day, this week, maybe this month, maybe even this year, Vicky. I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but a conversation well worth having and being part of. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and, excuse me, a bit of a frog in my throat, share my screen. All right, make sure I can see, and then Julian and Nikki, if you can monitor chat for me, I'm going to focus on the presentation, and as I said, I'll stop periodically, or you can give me a word that I need to address a question. Okay, so first off, big moment of gratitude for our Big Bang sponsors, as Julianne mentioned, including DLA Piper. We can put on this competition, these workshops, and provide the grants that we provide because of their support. So we are so grateful for them. And then next, coming up in less than 2 weeks. How is that possible, Nikki? This is less than 2 weeks. We started planning this back in 1914. Our colleague Jim Fielding, who is former head of the Disney stores, of DreamWorks, consumer products, senior exec at the Gap, former chairman of the Make-A-Wish Foundation, just an amazing guy, an advocate, will be on campus at the conference center on Tuesday, November 7th. The event starts at 5 o'clock and will run for about 90 minutes. He will give a talk, and then we're going to shift to fireside chat mode, and we will have Q&A. Anyone who is a current student who has a student ID, the first 50 folks will get a copy of his just recently published and now national bestseller, All Pride, No Ego, a Queer Executive's Journey to Living and Leading Authentically. So if you want to come, please RSVP. And just as a reminder, I suspect many of you have already done this, but you can scan on the left our link tree, and the first thing that pops up is Jim's talk, so you can RSVP for it even as we speak. And then please join us on LinkedIn. That will be the best way to stay in touch with all of our programs. Okay, so starting something that matters. I suspect all of you are thinking about the little bang, the big bang, because you have an idea, you have something that you want to pursue, you want to have an impact on the world. As you think about our mission at the Institute, is very much focused on how do we support folks like you on their hero's journey to have the impact that they want to have. For many of you, it will be being part of a startup or starting a company. But for probably even many more of you, it will be take that entrepreneurial knowledge and spirit and skill set and apply it in government, or apply it in another early stage company, or apply it in a large company, or maybe even apply it in academia. So we're going to talk about is sort of very much focused on new ventures, because this is part of the Big Bang workshops, but know that this sort of approach and thinking would apply wherever your hero's journey takes you. Okay, so several of you know have already had an interaction with me inflicted upon them, and you know I love Poll Everywhere. So there's two ways to participate in our poll. You can join with any device, including the one you're currently viewing this, by going to pollev.com and then entering UC Davis. Or if you've got the app, and the app is pretty cool, you just open up the app and put in UC Davis and join. You don't need to put a name. If it asks you for that, it's totally fine to be anonymous. So I got a couple of questions now, and I'll have a couple in a few minutes for you. Okay, my first one is, what innovation has had the biggest impact on your life? You can answer it more than once, but answer one at a time, one innovation at a time. So what innovation has had the biggest impact on your life? Electricity, an excellent choice. We would not be having this conversation if not for electricity. Air conditioning, I'm guessing you're not from Norway. Antibiotics, currency, these are all great. Online learning, again, we would not be here if not for that. Internet, and again, you can answer more than once, just one at a time. Technology, fanny packs, underappreciated, Nikki, underappreciated fanny packs. The iPhone, all those people at Google and Android are cringing at iPhone. Language, what a good invention, absolutely. AI, yes, right up until it eats us. Air conditioner, what else you got? These are all great, couple more. And Vicky Lee, you can weigh in as well. Alphabet, good idea. The numbering system, yep. I'm curious what Vicky's going to add. Print. What innovation has had the biggest impact on your life? All right, so I'm going to move to my second question. Why would someone want to start a new venture? Seems crazy. Why would somebody want to start a new venture? We're talking about building something that matters, right? So why would somebody want to start a new venture? To make a difference. And again, you can answer this more than once, but one idea at a time, please. Explore undiscovered subjects to create value. There is an unmet need. These are great. We're on it. 5 o'clock on a Thursday, Nikki, we're on it. To advance the necessity for future generations. Personal challenge. Somebody threw down the gauntlet, did they? I like it. Julia, don't worry. It only gets worse with me. Nikki's been through this. So you just shelter in place. Shelter in place. You'll be fine. Why would somebody want to start a new venture? You got to give me more than this. Come on. Problem solving. Sure. But why would somebody want to start a new venture? Why would you do this? make life easier, to make a living doing what they want to do. These are great. Find value in invaluable things. Wow. Okay, we're going deep here. I love it. This is fantastic. Make the life of a loved one easier. Thank you for that. That's very powerful. These are great. Another moment. Join the 1%. Hey, absolutely. Absolutely. To satisfy the soul. To change the world. These are great. One more moment, and then I have one more poll for you. Okay, last one. So this is a word cloud. So you can answer it more than once, but each time use a single word. What value, single word value, is at the heart of the reason to start a new adventure? Passion. Well, this doesn't look like a word cloud to me, Nikki. Purpose. We'll just metaphorically pretend it is. I love these. What value is at the heart of a reason to start a new venture? Independence. Vicky, you can weigh in. Change. What value is at the heart of a reason to start a new venture? Innovation. And again, innovation. Help. I love it. Community. Freedom.
Joe, everyone's taking my ideas.
Implementation. Well, that's a good sign. They're in good company then, Vicky.
Yeah.
Understanding. Adaptation. Another moment. Okay, fantastic. Thank you for those. All right, so as we start, I think several of you've had the opportunity to hear Andy talk about his view of what the best idea in the world is, right? And over the years, his research has looked into a number of really impactful innovations, right? And the best idea in the world that he talks about is penicillin, right? And if you think about the impact that, and one of you mentioned earlier, antibiotics, the impact that antibiotics have had on the world since the 1940s, and the number of lives that it has affected, it certainly would be a contender, right? So many of you know that the idea, the myth was that Fleming, randomly discovered in the lab that penicillin had the antibiotic properties, and from that discovery, penicillin came about, and the world was changed. Right? It's an oversimplification of a very complicated story. But the reality is that penicillin, the knowledge of it, had been around for a very, very, very long time. Starting in 2000 BC with Chinese remedies, and even into the 19th century and early 20th century, actual published documentation of how penicillin molds would inhibit bacterial growth, and have a potential impact. And the reality was, when Fleming published his paper in 1929, nothing happened. There was no real change. And again, Andy talks about this, I think, quite eloquently. I'm giving it a light touch because we're going to dive into some other things in a moment. But it was Fleming, ultimately, that created the underpinnings for what we know today as antibiotics. And Florey. And it was Florey and his team at Oxford that began to really understand the therapeutic potential of penicillin and get it to a place where you actually could create human trials. And it was 10 years later from Fleming's discovery that Florey worked, but it was only 2 years from the start of his efforts before they started to do human trials. And this is one of my favorite charts of all time. These little dots show the number of doses of penicillin that were available, the monthly production in billions of Oxford units. And you can say in late 42 is when you start with just a tiny amount, 400,000, which was enough to treat just a handful of patients, moving to 80 million. And by the end of 43 to 4 billion, and then by the end of World War II into the many hundreds of billions of Oxford units, right? Incredibly steep production curve from virtually nothing, right? So one question we want to ask ourselves as we start thinking about, starting something that matters is, why did Florey succeed when others had not, starting 2000 BC, right? And the first is, it's not about the idea, right? And if you think about all the great ideas you've heard in talking with your friends or reading about history, right? The reality is there've been quite a few over the years that the first codification of that idea wasn't the one that stuck. So the light bulb, I think many think that Edison invented the light bulb, or, Edison was the one that really made it commercial. Reality is there was a patent issued for a light bulb 50 years before Edison, moved to create the kind of electrical infrastructure that made the light bulb useful. We think about Ford, as the first car. Of course, it was not the first car. There had been quite a few models built before. Maybe a more modern example that some of you may be more familiar with, Google. Google was not the first, wasn't the 10th. It was the, depending on how you look at, 17th or 18th search engine, right? Wasn't the idea of a search engine, right? Facebook was, certainly not even close to being the first social media network, and nor was the iPod the first MP3 music player, nor was the iPhone the first digital phone, right? And so the idea itself certainly is important, but is in no way, shape, or form what's going to ultimately make you successful. The second principle is, and those of you that have been through our academies know this very firmly, the network is the innovation, right? For those of you who've seen my talk about the little blue circle versus the army of blue circles, right? You as an individual, you're very powerful. You have your own journey, you have your own things that you're interested in. But the reality is the impact that you're going to have on the world is based on the network and the relationships that you have. We make change together, right? And so this is a chart of all the relationships that were developed to ultimately make penicillin successful. And all is probably a little strong. These are the single most important ones, right? It's these network of relationships, some more important early, some more important later, that ultimately enable penicillin to happen. So the idea of penicillin was, as an antibiotic, but the reality of penicillin, that huge steep curve that I showed a moment ago, right, of actual doses that are produced in a safe way, in volume, to be able to treat patients, was a new configuration, this configuration of ideas, of relationships, organizations, policies, government entities that made it real. And third is, it's about commitment. This is a bit of a gruesome picture, but it shows a young child who had a bacterial infection, and very, very early on was one of the first to be treated with penicillin. And prior to an antibiotic, this child probably would not have survived. And you can see the progression from the first photo on the top left to the sixth photo on the bottom right, that with the introduction of penicillin, the bacterial infection was defeated and the child, ended up healthy. Transformative, right? And so several of you talked about wanting to change the world and, why would you start a new company to make life better? Here's a fantastic example of that. So thank you for sharing that, right? But the commitment, involves a whole series of steps, and just a couple examples here, right? Can you actually make the penicillin, right? an example of it in a petri dish is very different from a controlled environment where you can reliably produce it over and over again. So you can study it, so you can demonstrate that it's going to work and is not going to be toxic and actually make the patient work. That you can create it in enough volume to test it, that you can ultimately be able to make it at scale and then be able to synthesize it, right? These are all hard questions that revolve around this idea of commitment. Okay? So a couple of quotes. I love this Flory quote. It felt like I felt like a carpetbag salesman trying to promote a crazy idea for some ulterior motive, right? Those of you that have already had some experience in entrepreneurship or have read about entrepreneurs realize often it is very much a very lonely and challenging pursuit, right? And again, probably somebody that you all are slightly more familiar with, Steve Jobs says, I never spent so much of my time trying to convince people to do the right thing for themselves. But ultimately, it's worth it, right? If you think about the impact that Flory had in penicillin, or even the impact that Jobs and his colleagues at Apple had in transforming our world, right? These kinds of efforts are worth it. So as you think of worth it, so as you think about starting something that matters, right? Think about what is it that matters to you and what impact do you want to have on the world and what is the relationships that you need to build to ultimately be able to do that. So now I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about 4 teams of Aggie innovators. So a little closer to home than penicillin in the 1930s and 40s. And for those of you asking, no, I was not alive in the 30s and 40s. My teenager believes I was, but no, I did not fight in World War I or World War II, as it turns out. But these are all Aggie innovators over the last 10 or 15 years. But I think there's some nice stories here that we're going to talk about, and I'll give you time to ask me questions later about them. And we have case studies on all of these and quite a few more that we can make available to you. So the first narrative I want to talk about is Origin Materials, and 2 execs in particular, John Bissell and Ryan Smith. And John and Ryan come every year to our classes to come and talk about their company. They were both undergrads, right, in chemical engineering. And they had this idea that they could disrupt the PET market, the plastics market used to make water bottles and many other things, with a non-petroleum based bioplastic, right? And their vision was, how can we create something that is carbon neutral, that will both have a positive impact on the environment, but also be a viable product, that ultimately could be economically very powerful, right? So they leveraged an undergrad project that they created in a small $75,000 environmental grant and a series of faculty relationships to develop an initial technology and a plan. And then actually went from a group of 6, 7, 8 of them to the 2, 3, 4 that were willing to commit to move forward with this. And over the course of now 13, going 14 years, Nikki, going on 14 years, believe it or not, they invested in building their network, built out the knowledge and capabilities they needed, and went through a series of steps, right? From, can we create it in the lab? Can we create it in a stable, small amount? Can we build a pilot plant? Can we build a scale plant over a 12 to 13 year period, to the point now where they're a large publicly traded company with a $1.5 billion plant under construction in Louisiana and a second plant in planning. And so what's some lessons learned from this as a case study? First is, as you think about creating something that matters, right? Think about how you manage uncertainty and build commitment throughout your arc. John and Ryan have gone through 14 years, and every step of the way, there's been uncertainty that they have to devise a mechanism to reduce that uncertainty and ultimately build their commitment. Second is to embrace a growth mindset, right? How do you acquire the needed and missing capabilities? And there's so many examples of Origin Materials, but it started with a bunch of engineers, right, who had an idea and a scientific method to prove out that idea. But to be successful, they had to figure out how to build it at scale, how to manufacture it, how to build relationships with customers, big companies like PepsiCo and Danone, and then ultimately how they could manage the material supply chain to be able to replace a plastic that had been in use for decades and decades, and that had huge impact on manufacturing processes. So a lot of inertia and resistance to change. And then this notion of progressive validation, right? From the lab to a pilot to scale to make it work. And so those of you interested, you can go to originmaterials.com and learn a lot more about the company and about John. Okay, second company I want to talk about is Evolve Biosystems. And this is a combination of a team of graduate students and professors here at UC Davis. And over a series of grants from the National Institute for Health, the faculty and student teams discovered this hitherto unknown relationship between human milk oligosaccharides that are in mother's breast milk and the bacterium B. infantis, and this co-relationship having a profound impact on infant health and actually health throughout life. They faced numerous challenges to be able to move from this being a research project funded by NIH to being able to create a proof of efficacy to ultimately creating a viable business enterprise. But they were driven this whole time by creating something that matters, right? Which is this idea of saving babies. And what they learned is that premature infants often are put into dire peril because of issues with the gut and the unstable ability to accept nutrition. And that was their first market. But ultimately, they learned that the vast majority of infants born now in the developed world are missing this bacterium B. infantis. And it puts them at much greater risk for autoimmune challenges, both as infants as well as later in life. So what are some lessons learned? Well, one, it seems to go without saying, but hard things are hard. This was 10 years of research and 7, 8 years of transmission from research to a company to a real product, right? And in this case, passion and purpose, two words that you mentioned in our little poll everywhere, provided the inspiration and the focus in challenging times, and there were quite a few of them. And then this idea of moving from research to product to business required milestone-driven stages, but also the shift in personnel. So the folks that work when you're in the lab and you're really trying to prove out, does this actually work? And then the ones that need to be able to codify that and build out the basic company. And then the ones that need to go to market, the talent that you need, it shifts over time. And being open-minded and recognize that as an entrepreneur is critical. And if you want to learn more about this company, it's now called Infinite Health, and you can see the URL there, infinitehealth.com. Okay, third example is a company called Building Connected. Two undergrads from UC Davis, Dustin Devan and Jesse Peterson, were the founders. And the narrative is, Dustin leveraged deep knowledge of the construction business. He had spent 7, 8 years after his undergrad degree in various roles in that industry. And he took that knowledge, right? And he identified and proposed a solution to a key unmet need in the construction industry. And what it really was this platform, this marketplace for prime contractors and subcontractors and folks needing contractors to all meet and ultimately be able to form teams and successfully bid on projects. And he partnered with Jesse to develop and evolve the technology, recruit the core capabilities they needed in the company, and then test and evolve the product. Equally important was they developed this core set of values of how they wanted to operate the company, how they wanted to recruit and train people, and how they wanted to think about their customers. So really important lessons learned as you think about starting something matter. What kind of environment are you trying to create? What are you trying to do with your company? So a few lessons learned from Building Connected: develop a clear vision and path for the company from the beginning, right? But then make market-informed and market-focused decisions. A lot of assumptions don't survive reality. And Dustin and Jesse were very effective at being able to learn from the marketplace and make those adjustments. And then finally, use guiding principles to focus on how best to build the team and to serve customers. Okay, one more, and then I'll take some questions. So Vite Ramen, the friend of all college students and grad students, and sometimes parents with teenagers. So Vite Ramen was a company started by twin brothers, Tim and Tom Zhang. They were undergrads at UC Davis, having transferred here after 2 years in community college. They were, among many other things, parkour aficionados. And they were dissatisfied with the options they had for nutritional, convenient food. So things they could eat on the go in their busy undergrad and post-grad lifestyle, right? So in their apartment kitchen, they formulated a healthy instant ramen recipe over trial and error, over and over and over again, trying it on themselves, and then ultimately decided to produce and market it. They said, if it works for us, it works for other people like us, right? So they used Kickstarter to validate and launch their product, and then had a core set of product and management values that have helped them grow and scale the business. Among those, healthy ingredients, sourced from natural environments, where they completely control the manufacturing, not outsourcing it to anyone. So they know from beginning to end, everything that's in the product, how it's manufactured, and how it's delivered. And so some lessons learned from Vite Ramen. Leveraging personal experience, right? You think about creating something that matters. If you have a problem or you've seen something, a family member, whatever it might be, right? Leveraging that personal experience and observation to create an opportunity, right? Progressively building commitment by identifying and testing key assumptions. We talk about, will the dogs like the dog food, right? Will the college students like the ramen, right? Being able to test and evolve it and not assume that batch number one is the winning is the winning batch. And then finally, demonstrate agility in the face of new information and adversity. This case study takes place during their company's growth period, which happened to coincide with the COVID pandemic and their ability to navigate that. And so you can learn more about the company and order ramen if you like. They have a lovely vegan ramen at viteramen.com. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up in a little bit, but before I do, let me see if there are any questions. I'll stop sharing for a moment because it's a good place to take questions that you all may have. And if you don't ask questions, I'm going to randomly cold call on someone, so you probably should ask a question. Tough crowd, Nikki. Julianne, do you have any questions? That's the first time you saw that.
Yeah, I do have a question, maybe not quite as, directly related to what you presented, but considering the kind of lack of questions in the meeting chat room, what, like for writers, like the hardest thing is staring at a blank page.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I thought your polling exercise was so effective because, people were kind of challenged collectively to think quickly and not overthink what they were submitting.
Mm-hmm.
So when, people are at the stage where they want to contribute or they're frozen for whatever reason, or they want to come up with an idea, they're almost on the cusp of it, or they want to ask a question, but it's not there. What are some hacks, I guess, or how can people kind of help themselves out of this sort of stuck situation? What's a way to get the wheels spinning without overthinking it?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Thank you for that. So I think, we feel very strongly that, and Andy's research bears this out, that change comes through a network, right? And And if you look at the processes that have been most successful in moving from an idea to impact, there's two relatively simple concepts that work in concert. And they're things we've known about since we were little kids. And sometimes we forget about them. And that is collaboration and iteration, right? And for those of you that have gone through the spaghetti marshmallow tower exercise, you realize that 6-year-olds are better at it than 36-year-olds, in part because they're really good at collaborating and iterating using the best thinking and asking questions and not being committed to any particular path. So open to new knowledge and new ideas, and then willing to try things quickly. And when they don't work, abandon them and move on to the next thing, right? And I think psychologically, we often are reticent to have those conversations for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's uncomfortable putting ourselves out there. And then we often get committed to something before we should, right? It's an early idea, so let's iterate, right? And so the ability to collaborate and iterate in a virtuous cycle is a way to get through that. I can appreciate your point. So my mentor and hero from my Imagineering days was Marty Sklar, and he is a legendary president of Imagineering for like 4 years. He was Walt Disney's personal speechwriter, and then he became the head of Imagineering and oversaw the development of 10, 11 theme parks around the world. And Marty would say the scariest thing in the world is a blank piece of paper, right? Where all things are possible, right? And so the more you can begin to start with a nugget of an idea and go through that collaborative and iterative process and bring in different perspectives and bring in different capabilities, the more likely you're going to be able to move it forward. But it requires putting yourself out there a little bit. And then as you move towards when you have something tangible, we talk very consistently about the importance of exposing your idea and your pitch to as many people as possible to get their feedback, recognizing that, Vicky and I might both listen to your pitch, and Vicky will say one thing and I will say the exact opposite. And it's you as the entrepreneur that's going to have to take bits and pieces of all those conversations and continue to guide your process forward. But that kind of differentiated iteration, I mean, Vicky lives in Silicon Valley, so, by definition, her idea is right. And those of us here in Aggie land, we're just, we're here in our overalls. But that ability to seek and be able to filter through diverse perspectives is also really, really important. Well, that's a great question.
I actually think so, Joe. I think that last point for the entrepreneurs and founders that I work with is often the most challenging. Figuring out how to sift through the different perspectives, and some of them are turn out to be wrong, right? But the problem is many of them are coming from other serial entrepreneurs, successful investors. And they do think that they're always right. And the fact is they're not always right. And so it's very challenging, I think, for entrepreneurs to figure that out.
Yep, absolutely.
There's another question in the chat, Joe, for you. What are the signs that an idea is scalable?
Got it. Yep. Let me open up chat. What are the signs of that?
Yep.
Another excellent question. So I'm going to start with an editorial, and then I'll do my best to answer the question. But Vicky, you're now engaged, so and you have a lot of experience in this area. So I may phone a friend on this, phone a Vicky for this. So, the first question you ask yourself is, ultimately, what's your goal, right? And we talk about scalability as being an important part of a way of measuring the impact of an idea. And that's certainly true to a certain extent, right? But I think a lot of times we think about the classic entrepreneur in the startup, we think about, going through venture financing and building something that's scalable, that it can be IPO'd or acquired or whatever, and have, kind of significant financial worth as well as, social impact. And that's a hallmark of the sort of traditional entrepreneurial ecosystem. But there are plenty of opportunities to build focused companies and ideas that never scale it in that way. They maybe don't even take venture financing, that are bootstrapped or debt financed or whatever, that can, be perfectly lovely, lifestyle businesses, or can focus on something that you want to have impact on that is very narrowly targeted, right? And so the thing I want to make sure that, we don't get wrapped up around as a group, and certainly at the Institute, is that the only good ideas are ideas that turn into billion-dollar IPOs. Those are great, nothing wrong with them, good on you, but those aren't the only good ideas. And in fact, a lot of people have lovely careers and lovely impact on the world with things that don't ever take venture, and don't ever scale to the point that Squawk Box is talking about it on CNBC. So shifting so after that editorial, sorry, shifting to answer your question, I think ultimately there's and I'm going to turn Vicky to you in a moment, but there's a sort of a tried and true set of principles and people you'd want to get involved, right? And it starts with people that have deep knowledge of your industry and what you're trying to focus on, who can really tell you what is the true, totally addressable market for this idea. What are the products and services and experiences in there now? How is what you're going to do, ultimately gonna change, disrupt, grow, whatever that business. And even then, you don't know that it's going to do it, but you're starting with if you're targeting a market that's currently $50 million and you want to build $1 billion business, that's probably more than a long shot, right? If you're targeting a market that's, $5 billion and growing at 20% a year, that's probably a very different. So it starts with the market, but then it moves quickly to what are you doing and how is it different from what is there? And, what's a reasonable belief that your ability to disrupt, change, grow the market, would ultimately lead to something scalable. But let me turn to Vicky, who can give some, maybe a couple of specific examples from the many clients that she's taken from very small companies to very large companies.
Yeah, I mean, Joe's absolutely right. The reality is that we all hear about the Googles and the Metas and the Teslas of the world, but there's, for every one of those companies that ends up being, starting in a garage somewhere and then growing to be a global behemoth, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of other companies that, as Joe said, you can make a perfectly good living, and or they just don't work out, and yet the IP, the technology is still really valuable and is solving a problem out there. So it's really important to keep in mind, not everyone needs to have that home run, win the jackpot, whatever metaphor you want to use. There's lots of other ways to hit all those values that you had on the chat or on the poll: contribute, help, assist, build community, and you can still be successful in achieving all of those things, on a smaller scale, and still be very kind of satisfied in your career and your objectives. So I like to tell a story as when was it? So I'm going to date myself here. So I'm a 93, an 86 undergrad year and a 93 law school grad. And so I went through the late 90s where it seemed like every company could get financed on a whim. Money was just flowing everywhere here in Silicon Valley. And as lawyers, I had many friends who left the practice of law at a law firm to go in-house because they thought that was their path to being in a company, getting options, making a ton of money when the companies went public. Of all my friends who did that, I think I count one out of maybe 30 who actually made money from a company going public or getting acquired. And even that person did not make enough money to ultimately retire. So that's just a story from my own experience of, things just not working out, but yet these are people that have wonderful careers working for really interesting companies, developing really great solutions, on a different scale.
Thank you, Vicky. That was great. We should do this together more. This is fun.
We don't do this enough. We don't do this enough.
You know what we really need to do? We need to get the act where we can co-juggle flaming axes and we can just throw them across. That would be fun.
That'd be great.
Growth mindset.
Right. Any other questions for Joe before we jump into IP?
Well, I have a couple more wrap-up slides.
Oh, yeah,
Vicky,
okay,
if you
sorry.
don't mind. Yep. So seeing no additional questions, I'm gonna go back to, oops, sorry. I'm sharing the wrong thing. Nope. About 5 more minutes. Okay, so a couple more poll everywhere questions for you. So the extent to which you're ready to share this, it's always fun to see what kinds of ideas we have, right? So what are you planning to start? Poll EV/UC Davis, or if you got the app, just have UC Davis. What are you planning to start? Entertainment education crossover. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. What are you planning to start? Or what are you thinking about? When we say planning, don't worry about, I don't have the whole thing worked out. Just what's in your mind's eye. And remember, it's not about the idea. You're not giving it away. Education technology company already started. Good on you. What are you planning to start? Super menu, your personalized menu preferences to share with everyone. Great. Thank you for sharing that. Keep them coming. What are you planning to start? AI assisted learning. Awesome. Give us more. Give us more. What are you planning to start? Don't hold back. Agricultural consulting company. Cool. Build a better Canvas or learning experience. Excellent. Advanced biobattery startup. Vicky, these are cool. Come on. Aggie Power, baby. This is awesome. What are you planning to start? Modular system for building immersive in-person games. Cool. One more moment. If you haven't already shared, please share. And again, doesn't mean you've already built it or figured it out, or maybe you have, but what's in your mind's eye? It's great for you to get it out there, and it's great for others to see it. All right. Oh, we got one more. Platform to pair musicians who have ASL with, oops, sorry, I'm lost it here a second, with professional, well-known musicians who can serve as collaborators Those with ASL would write songs with and sing through the professional musicians. Very cool. Thank you for sharing. This is awesome. All right. Going to go to our next poll question. Why are you pursuing your idea? What's the why? That's the what. That's what you're doing. What's the why? Why are you doing this? For better education experience. Love it. Why are you pursuing your idea? To help people. Get us the why. As best you know in this moment in time. To tackle bigger social problems. Remember pollev.com, UC Davis? Or UC Davis using the Poll Everywhere app. Why are you pursuing your idea? For the fulfillment of bringing something into the world. Great. Absolutely. Another moment. Helping people make easier and or healthier decisions on what to consume. It affects me personally, and often that's the case, right? Solving a problem I know exists. Great. Thank you for these. These are fantastic. All right, our last poll, and then I will wrap up, and we'll take a 1 or 2 moment stretch, and then we're going to move into intellectual property. All right, we'll see if this is an actual word cloud, but what one word captures your thoughts on moving forward? And again, you can answer this multiple times. Just do it one word at a time. As you think about moving forward, about starting something that matters, right? What one word captures your thoughts on moving forward? Scalability. All right, that's fair. Network. What one word captures your thoughts on moving forward about building something that matters? And again, feel free to answer more than once. And even if you haven't codified your ideas, you think about moving forward and why you might, right? Give us a value, give us a word, right? Impact, right? Customer. Keep them coming, keep them coming. Hopeful. I love that word. That's a great word. Start. Discovery. What one word captures your thoughts on moving forward? And again, you can answer more than once, just one word at a time. Think about why you're doing this, right? Growth. Connect. What one word captures your thoughts on moving forward? Food. Network. Starting to dominate. Crazy. I think that's a good word, Vicky. Prototype. Love. Another moment. These are great. Revolutionary. Love it. This is great, but at the center of all, network. One more moment. Pitch. Absolutely. These are great. Thank you so much for this. Okay. Test. All right. So as you move forward, right? Thinking about building something that matters, right? Ask yourself a few questions. There's quite a few to ask. And those of you who've been through the academy know that, early stages is as much about asking the right questions over and over again than it is getting the right answers. In fact, it's really almost all about the right questions, right? But starting with, what are your goals? Why are you doing this, right? What is your process for moving ahead? How are you going to advance, right? Whose counsel will you seek? We're going to talk about this in subsequent workshops, right? But the importance of mates on your team and advisors and mentors to help you through the process, right? What capabilities do you need to build and acquire? Think back to the super quick version of the penicillin example I gave. The science was great to discover that, there is this antibiotic, but to make it real, think of all the skills and capabilities that needed to come into play, right? How will you grow your network? What kinds of relationships and steps are you going to take? Several of you heard me talk about you get 168 hours in a week. We all do. How much of that are you spending building out your network, right? And I would say with 100% certainty, time to get started. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are any final questions before I turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Lee. Okay, seeing none, sorry, Julian, you got a question?
I have one quick question, Joe.
Yeah.
So, thinking about like interpersonal conflicts potentially within a group, I'm curious how much time, especially early on, is this a consideration? Devoting time to team building or making sure that values are aligned versus prototyping and iterating and focusing on the idea and developing the idea and testing it with the potential market.
It's a great question, and I'd say that, and this will be a nice transition into Vicky. The short answer is, as always, it depends. In the early stages, often it's less of a consideration and less of a focus, just realistically. But I think the companies that are most successful and have the highest probability of growing into something grapple with that pretty early on. And it's some version of, are these people whose values are aligned with mine? Are we doing it for the same reasons, or are the reasons at least compatible? Do we share a vision for what we're trying to build, risk profile, and things like that? One quick example, the origin materials. And Nikki knows, the whole crew that started. We only talk with, John and Ryan now, but there were a group of 8 of them originally who were working on the project and doing the prototyping and the, sort of experimental work. And there came a moment in time where it's like, well, we can't just do this on weekends and at nights and everything. It's like, we're either committed to this or not. And John called the ball. He just basically said, who wants to step forward and commit to doing this, and who's not comfortable doing that. And it was only a handful of them that stayed with it, and the others stepped back. And no value judgment against those that stepped back, but that's a sign of a really skilled entrepreneur to call that at that point, right? If the company was not going to advance without commitment, and there couldn't be this, some of us are somewhat committed and some of us, aren't. I hate the breakfast analogy, as I'm a vegetarian, but it's the difference between the chicken and the pig, when you have eggs and hash browns and bacon for breakfast. And, it's like the chicken's sort of committed and the pig's really committed. It's a bit of a stark metaphor, but can be effective. So, that was a really important decision that had to be made. So early on, it wasn't so important, right? When they were playing in the lab and using, but if there came a moment in time where it was really important, and depends on the situation as to when that is. But it's a really good question and a great segue into Vicky Lee.
Perfect. Are we going to take a 1-minute break?
Stand up? Sure.
Yeah, stand up. I'm just going to run and get a coffee, and I'll be right back.
All right.
Can everyone see my screen?
We see that you've started screen sharing, but I'm seeing dark at the moment.
Really? I'm getting a note.
There we go. Got
Oh.
it now. Looks good.
Okay. All right. I got a note that said that Zoom quit unexpectedly. Yeah.
Well, that's not good.
Vicky, I have your presentation on my desktop. Do you want me to open it?
I lost the connection for a second. Let me try again here. How's that?
Can see it.
It's good.
Better? Okay. Do we have everyone back?
We're good.
All right. So thanks everybody for having me, Joe, Nikki, and Solway. Shoot, are you guys still able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I am having some connection problems, I think, but let's go with it. I have to say I am better at doing these in person than doing them online. So Joe is much better and more creative with the polls and everything. So I'll do the best that I can here by doing this on Zoom. As Joe said, I have been a partner at DLA Piper now for almost 20 plus years. I've been practicing for almost 30 years. As I said, that dates me. We're a global law firm, and I have spent my entire career working on technology transactions and IP transactions, working with companies that are some of the largest companies in the world, as well as I said, the venture-backed startups, the entrepreneurs that are just starting their first venture in their home, in their garage. The common theme in working with those companies is they're all focused on developing intellectual property, creating value. A lot of the M&A work that I do, intellectual property is a core asset. And so what we're going to talk about today is, what do you think about, or what should you keep in mind as you're starting a company, and what's the role of intellectual property? We'll talk about IP in formation issues, and then we'll talk about what investors are looking for. First of all, why should you care about IP? So I like to show this slide. So what this slide shows is the difference in the value of intangible assets versus tangible assets over time. So you can see here in 1975, the top S&P 500 companies, they're IBM, ExxonMobil, Procter & Gamble, GE, 3M. The red is the value of tangible assets in those companies. And then the black is the value of intangible assets. You can see in 1975, most of the value of these 5 largest global companies by market cap, very little value is from intangible assets. If you fast forward to 2018, you can see that the black part of the bar is much larger now than the red part of the bar. The red part of the bar, again, is the tangible assets. The black is the intangible assets. And you can also see the change in the composition of the 5 largest companies. Now it is Apple, Alphabet, or in 2018, it was Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, now Meta. Can anyone tell me the difference between the companies that are the top companies in 1975 versus the companies in 2018? Anyone want to come off mute and speak up?
Come on, let's go for it.
It seems like it's hardware in the past to software in the future.
Right. So it is intangible assets, it's software, it's knowledge capital. We're moving to an economy that is much more, where the value is much more based on knowledge capital. Now, if you look at the largest global companies by market cap in 2023, you have Apple, Microsoft, Saudi Aramco, Alphabet, Amazon, and 7 of the top 10 are the technology sector. Same thing that we see here in this next slide. Intangible assets are 90% of the value of the S&P 500 companies. And the value of the intangible assets in the S&P 500 companies from 1975 to 2020 have tripled. And the biggest change is happening from 1985 to 1995, where the values doubled. So as I said, the global economy is moving away from this this industrial fixed asset based foundation and moving more towards an economy where knowledge and services are the key drivers of value for these companies. And so that's all, to show why intellectual property is important and why we're talking about this as part of the prep for the Big Bang competition, Little Bang, and as you think about the companies that you're going to form, why intellectual property should be a key part of your formation strategy and then your overall business strategy. One thing to keep in mind is intellectual property is international. It is the protection of intellectual property is facilitated by a series of different treaties. As an example, patents are protected by the Paris Convention. We now have a unified patent court and European patents in the EU. One of the more common protocols that are, or treaties that are used to protect trademarks is the Madrid Protocol. Most developed countries are members or parties to the Berne Convention that protects copyrights. IP enforcement is country by country. So the fact that you have a patent in the United States does not mean that your invention is protected if you were to manufacture, say, in Malaysia. So again, it's very important as part of executing on the business strategy to think about where you're going to be conducting business, where product is being manufactured, where it's technology is being developed, because that's going to be a factor in where and how you protect your intellectual property, because the enforcement is country by country. Here, what I'm going to go through quickly is some common types of intellectual property. The key buckets of intellectual property are patents, copyrights, trademarks, and trade secrets. Patents are rights granted to Congress in the U.S. Constitution to encourage inventorship. Our founding fathers, when they wrote up the U.S. Constitution, they were already thinking about inventions. They wanted to encourage innovation, and so the right to patents is actually specified in the U.S. Constitution, and the right is granted to Congress to pass the Patent Act, and inventors are given their exclusive right to inventions. Patents are good for 20 years from the date of filing, 15 years for design patents. The difference between the design patent and the utility patent is, if you think about a TV, all the widgets, all that go into that TV, many of those widgets are the chips, the software is protected by patents. The design patents, the example I like to give is, or like to show, is the Apple iMac. You know, some of you might remember that kind of bulbous shaped computer that Apple developed early on. That design or that shape of that computer was protected by a design patent. Design patents are not as common as utility patents, but they are permitted under the Patent Act. What are the rights granted to the patent holder? It's the exclusive right to make, use, sell, import, and have made. What can be protectable? Inventions, as I said, designs, plant patents. Again, not very common here in Silicon Valley, but very common in a place like Davis, where you're developing new plants, and there's a whole separate practice. Our firm does not practice in the area, but there is a whole separate practice that focuses on plant patents. What are the requirements for an invention to be patentable? It has to be novel, has to be new. There's no prior art. You're coming up with a new invention to solve a problem, and that invention hasn't been developed previously. Patent lawyers often go through the process of conducting prior art searches. You can also do that yourself as a founder or an entrepreneur. You can run searches, but people run those prior art searches because being novel is a requirement for an invention to be patentable. Has to have utility. It can't be against public policy, and it has to be non-obvious. Has to be non-obvious to someone who is working in the area. Again, it's the idea of innovation, coming up with something new. Okay. And so the Patent and Trademark Office, the patent examiners, as they review the applications, they're looking for inventions that check those boxes before they approve the patent applications and issue the patents. Copyrights are also rights granted to Congress in the U.S. Constitution, and they encourage authors to create works of authorship. Okay. They give authors the exclusive rights to their works. Registration is not required. I often get the question about, do I have to register for a copyright in order for my software to be protected? The answer is no. And the reality is that most software companies don't register their copyrights. You have a valid copyright as soon as you reduce an idea to a tangible medium of expression. That's the requirement under the Copyright Act. What do we mean by a tangible medium of expression? Writing down a play, writing down the lyrics to a song, writing down the ones and zeros for software code. Those are all examples of protectable works of authorship. And again, as soon as you reduce the idea to a tangible medium of expression, you have a protectable copyright. The registration, what registration gives you is the ability to enforce that copyright. And the reason why many software companies choose not to register their copyrights is they typically don't like to be in the business of suing their customers. And software innovation and development happens so rapidly that oftentimes by the time the registration of the software code is done, they're on to the next version of software. It's not a complicated process to register a copyright, but there is some effort involved and there's some time. And again, because software is often developing so quickly and new releases are coming out, it just doesn't, it often doesn't make sense for software companies to go through the trouble of registering. The rights granted to a holder of a copyright is the exclusive right to reproduce, to distribute, to prepare derivative works, or modify, and then publicly perform and publicly display. You'll see here, I have in red human inventors and human authorship. With all the talk around artificial intelligence, generative AI, the approach to intellectual property is changing. Even the Copyright Act has not always kept up with the software development. And so many of you, I'm sure, have heard about some of the recent cases around generative works that are generated by some of the generative AI platforms. We're watching all of those cases very closely because they are going to, I think, force possibly a different approach to intellectual property. And certainly for companies that are looking to protect intellectual property, the outcome of those cases is going to inform how we think about protecting intellectual property to the extent that generative AI is used in the development of that intellectual property. For the time being, in the US, patents do need to be created by human or developed by human inventors. In the US, currently, human authorship is required for a protectable copyright. There are some countries that will accept patent inventions developed through artificial intelligence. South Africa is one. I believe Australia is another. So again, I have to say that with artificial intelligence, it's about as interesting and exciting a time to be a lawyer, either in intellectual property or working with technology companies like I do. It's a very interesting and exciting time right now. It's why I love doing what I do, because it's never boring. And with technology advancements and innovation, the legal framework, I feel like it's constantly pushing the envelope and forcing us to think about things differently. So it's like I said, a very interesting time right now. Other bucket of intellectual property is trademarks. So trademarks, and when I use the term trademarks, I also mean service marks and logos and brands. What are trademarks? They identify the source and the quality of goods and services. So for example, if you see the Apple logo, you immediately think about the quality of an Apple product, right? That's a valuable trademark. The strongest trademarks are the ones that are arbitrary. We wouldn't think about Apple in the context of a computer, software, a phone, right? And so that type of mark being arbitrary is a very strong mark. Marks that are descriptive are not strong trademarks. So if you're coming up with the name for your company, coming up with a name that is something for example, if you're in the cybersecurity space, calling a company cybersecurity software company, that's not a strong name for a company. It's not a strong mark because it's descriptive. So instead, coming up with a name like like Meta, for example, for a company that has a broad business, social media platforms, marketplaces, it's not descriptive at all. It's completely arbitrary. That's a very strong mark. Okay. Trademark registrations are good for 10 years from registration. They are renewable so long as you're using the mark. If you see a R with a circle around it, that means that that trademark or service mark or logo has been registered. If you see a small TM in a superscript, that means that the user of that mark, logo, or service mark is using that mark as a common law trademark. So you can have common law rights without registration, but they're not as protectable as if you have a valid registration. Okay. Let me see. The next bucket of IP is trade secrets. What are trade secrets? It's non-public information that provides a competitive advantage by virtue of not being publicly known, and the efforts are actually taken to maintain that information of a trade secret. Here I have a note around, use of generative AI. So when you are inputting information into a generative AI platform to elicit an output or a result, you need to be careful about what that input is that you're providing to the generative AI platform, because what happens is you risk losing trade secret protection if you are inputting information that you would otherwise consider a trade secret. The reason for that is not all generative AI platforms are going to treat your information as confidential information. And remember, the definition of a trade secret includes or requires that efforts be taken to maintain that information as a trade secret. So how can you show that you've taken efforts to maintain that information as a trade secret? You have a policy, for example, you have a policy that requires all your employees to go through training on a regular basis in protecting the company's confidential information. You require your employees to, wipe the whiteboard in conference rooms before you, after a meeting. They can only access the company's systems with secure user credentials that include passwords that are maintained in a secure fashion. So those are all ways that companies can show that they're taking efforts to maintain information as a trade secret. So long as you make those efforts, trade secret protection can theoretically continue forever. The example I like to use is the Coca-Cola recipe. Anecdotally, only 2 people within the Coca-Cola company ever know the secret to Coke at the same time. It's under lock and key in a safe. The 2 people are never permitted to fly on the same airplane. And so they've taken, it's very clear the steps they've taken to protect the Coke recipe. And as a result, the Coca-Cola recipe has been maintained as a trade secret for over 100 years. What are the rights that are owned by the holder of a trade secret? It's the right to control the use and disclosure of that information. What can be protectable? Manufacturing methods, customer lists, pricing. Remember that negative information can also be protectable as a trade secret. It doesn't have to be information that shows that something is working. The fact that you have gone down a path, it's not been a successful process, having that information in hand and not sharing that unsuccessful test, for example, with a competitor, that can give you a competitive advantage. because your competitor could be going down the wrong path, but they don't know that you've already done it and it didn't work, right? And so just keep in mind that it doesn't always have to be information that shows something successful, right? So remember that negative information can also be treated as a trade secret. The other thing is data. Data can be treated as a trade secret, and increasingly, companies are leveraging and monetizing data, and so data can be an incredibly valuable trade secret. And so keep that in mind as well. So what do you want to keep in mind when you're starting a company? How do you start your new venture? Many of you may be currently employed. You enjoy a steady paycheck. So are you prepared to, give up the steady paycheck and go and start your new venture? That often is not an easy decision for people. And it's not just a monetary decision, but it is a decision that could affect how intellectual property is protected. So one question that often arises is, can you work on your new venture while you're still working for your current employer? Many of you who work for companies where technology or IP is a key asset likely signed an employee inventions or confidentiality or inventions assignment agreement. There's all kinds of different names that we call these documents, but at their core, they include confidentiality obligations. They include obligations on you as an employee that around assignment of intellectual property. The reason why employers have those agreements signed by employees is they want to be very clear about who owns developments while employees are working for the company. And so that goes to, again, the question of, can you work on your new venture while you're still working for your current employer? The answer is maybe. It depends on what you're doing. If what your new venture involves is a business that is related to your current employer's business, it can be very risky to work on the new venture while you're still working for your current employer. And the reason for that is you may be spending time at home working on your new venture, coming up with a new business idea. Maybe you're coding, but if it's related to your current employer's business, your current employer may end up owning it. Factors that go into that assessment include: are you working on your employer's computer? Every company, most employees get a laptop. Are you coding away on your employer's laptop? Are you maybe using your employer's lab? So it's really important to think about when you start your new venture and when you separate from your current employer, again, because it can impact IP ownership. And that is something that investors are very interested in when they're thinking about investing in you. So other consideration: how do you leave your current employer? Is there anything that you can take with you? And what do you need to remember? So how do you leave your current employer? You want to leave on good terms with them if you can. You don't want to burn your bridges. Not only is that just generally a bad idea, but if you leave your employer on bad terms, you're also giving them a reason to look more closely at what you might have been doing towards the end of your employment, and look more closely to see if there's anything that you might have been working on that you now want to take with your new company when your current employer or your former employer might have actually had rights to. And so that's something to keep in mind. What else do you need to remember? Oftentimes those agreements that you signed when you started with your former employer include provisions around what you can take with you, whether or not you can go back and solicit the employment of others. Non-solicits and non-compete provisions in California are not generally enforceable. We in California, we're a very pro-employee state. We believe that as public policy, we want to encourage people to be able to have employment mobility. And so as a matter of public policy, we do not enforce non-competes and non-solicits, except non-solicits in a very limited circumstance where you're really focused on protecting intellectual property. There are other states that will enforce non-competes and non-solicits. Non-compete, non-competition law and non-solicits, we call them restrictive covenants. Those are enforced on a state-by-state basis, and there's a spectrum of how aggressive states are in enforcing those restrictive covenants. So one thing to do as you're leaving an employer is to read your agreement. Make sure that you really understand what you signed up to when you first started your employment and what your obligations are to your former employer. Again, having clean hands as you start your new venture is going to be really important. What is it that your current employer owns? So we talked a little bit about these, we call them PIAs, so Employee Proprietary Information and Inventions Agreements. Copyrightable works of authorship, so software, documentation, user manuals, to the extent that you create within the scope of your employment any copyrightable works of authorship, whether or not you sign an agreement, your employer automatically owns those works of authorship as work for hire. So there's what we in the Copyright Act, we call it the work for hire doctrine. If you're working for a software company, you don't have to sign an agreement, and the software company automatically owns the software that you write as an employee. That's not the case for anything that's patentable. So for inventions that are patentable, there's actually an assignment that needs to happen by the employee to the employer. And that's one reason why we have these PIAs that are signed. So that, and as well as the confidentiality obligations for the trade secret protection. If you are hiring a consultant or a contractor, or if you're working as a consultant or contractor, the situation is different. Even for copyrightable works of authorship, you have to have a written agreement in order for there to be an assignment, a valid assignment. So, and as an example, if I am working on a website development for a company, and I am a contractor or a consultant for that company, I, as the website developer, I will retain ownership of the website I develop, unless I have signed a written agreement assigning ownership of that website over to the company that hired me. Okay. The difference, if I'm an employee, is if I'm an employee working on website development, I don't have to have an agreement in place. The company that employs me will automatically own the website that I develop. Okay. There are certain types of work that are commissioned by an independent contractor, where those works can be designated as a work for hire. So as one example is a map. So that is the second branch of the work for hire doctrine. The first branch is Employer owns whatever the employee does within the scope of their development, scope of employment. And then the second branch of the work for hire doctrine is this list of specially commissioned works that are created, and those are owned by the commissioning party. Okay, non-competes and non-solicits, we talked a little bit about that already. University policies. I like to talk about university policies because we are, talking at UC Davis, at least virtually tonight. Most universities, I would say probably all universities, have policies that govern the ownership or development of intellectual property by professors and graduate students. The policies can differ as to how they treat development, but generally you want to make sure you understand what those university policies are. Why is that important for founders? It is very common for companies getting started to engage with professors as advisors. You might set up a company and have an advisory board. You might have a professor sitting on your board of directors. You might have a professor consulting for you part-time. If that professor or graduate student is engaged in development, you want to make sure that you understand what the policies are for the university that they work with or they're enrolled at, because you need to understand whether the university may actually have rights to the intellectual property that they're developing. True story on that front. Several years ago, I was working with a client that had been spun out of Georgia Tech. They were in the process of being acquired by Cisco at the time that we started working with them. They had been represented by another law firm previously. It turned out that when this company spun out of Georgia Tech, there was a professor involved. The professor was one of the founders. There was some key technology that was developed by that professor for the company while he was employed as a professor at Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's policy regarding intellectual property development by its professors required a written waiver in order for the company to own the intellectual property that any of the Georgia Tech professors developed on their kind of side engagements. The startup company did not understand what Georgia Tech's policy said. They did not get a written waiver. And so now fast forward, we get involved. Cisco wants to acquire this company. Cisco does their due diligence and sees that no waiver was obtained by Georgia Tech. They are about to pay a boatload of money for this company, and they are not comfortable that the company actually owns the core intellectual property that was the basis of this company's business. So what ended up happening? Cisco ended up reducing the purchase price, and I think the purchase price was reduced by about a third, and they required that of that reduced purchase price, they were going to hold back a portion of it, more than they had originally intended, but they were going to hold back a portion from the shareholders for an extended period of time, just in case Georgia Tech came back later and asked for either the IP back or asked for some compensation for the use of the IP. So that's an example of where an inadequate attention to intellectual property hygiene can really come back to bite you at an inconvenient time. And issues with contractors, consultants, disgruntled employees, universities, as in this example, these problems often pop up when the company is about to get financed, when the company is about to, undergo a acquisition, and those are not great. You don't end up in a good leverage position when that happens, and so that's why with the companies that we work with, we like to try to educate the founders and the entrepreneurs up front about how these problems can pop up. Okay, so how are we doing on time, Julianne and Nikki?
We're doing pretty well. We have about 15 minutes to 7 o'clock.
Okay, 15 minutes.
Yeah, and you may want to leave a couple minutes for questions.
Yep. So I'm gonna skip ahead and talk about so one thing on trade secrets and patents. When you file a patent application in the US, typically the patent application remains unpublished up until about 18 months after filing. Once the patent is published, once the application is published, anything in the application is no longer considered a trade secret. So one key consideration for any company getting started is, what IP protection are you going to use? And this comes into place most clearly in the decision between filing for patents or maintaining the information as a trade secret. Again, remember, patents have a limited shelf life, 20 years after filing. Trade secrets, perpetual, theoretically can be maintained, information can be maintained as a trade secret forever. And so, thinking through how the different type of patent protection may support the business, it is really important, because once the trade secret protection is lost, you can't put the genie back into the bottle. So that is a key consideration that I wanted to bring up. Let me see. So we talked a little bit about training. When you're starting a company, it's really important to establish an IP savvy culture. You want to make sure that everyone in the company understands why IP is important, right? Think back to the earlier slides. Where's the value? Having regular training, having a process for onboarding employees, onboarding contractors, making sure they understand the value of the IP, the company has an IP strategy, and how the company is implementing the IP strategy. All of that is important for making sure that you're you're aligning your IP strategy consistent with your business goals. And so, and it also making sure that that's, one of the ways that you're showing you're protecting your trade secret information, is having that level of training, having that level of kind of that process in place for onboarding employees and contractors. So let's say you have a company started, now you're going to go out and try to get some financing. What do investors care about? Investors, companies thinking about acquiring another company, they go through this process called due diligence. Due diligence is they want to make sure they're getting they're either investing or paying the value for the company that they think that they're getting, right? So if they believe that the IP has a certain value, or that there's trade secrets that are key to a company, they want to make sure that that information is actually maintained as a trade secret. So they go through this process of due diligence. They ask and do their ask the company about what their IP strategy is, have they reviewed prior art, what patents cover the products, what does the competitive landscape look like, and so they go through this exercise. We talked about the employee agreements and the contractor agreements. They will ask for copies of all of those agreements to make sure that they have confidentiality clauses, make sure that they have the assignment language that's needed. Open source software is another key issue that investors look at. It's often a separate work stream within the due diligence process. For those of you who are familiar with open source, there are different types of licenses, some more onerous than others. And for the most onerous open source licenses, what we call the copyleft licenses, depending on how that open source software is used, you may end up having to open source what you thought was your proprietary software. And then what you've lost is you've lost the right to control the copyright to the software, and you've lost the right to control the source code to that software, so it's no longer a trade secret. And depending on the license involved, you might have lost the right to control your ability to grant patent licenses to the software. And so that's open source software is a big issue for investors to be looking at. Again, on the trade secrets, they look at disclosures of source code. They look at the protective measures that have been undertaken to protect the trade secret information. And then they look at the impact of generative AI. Have you used any generative AI tools or platforms to create any of the company products? Have trade secrets been inadvertently disclosed in the course of using any generative AI platform? And then, university and government funding, that can also, as we talked about, that can impact IP ownership. Trademarks, we talked about the difference between registering trademarks and then treating them as common law trademarks. The other thing is, are you taking steps to preserve the value and the goodwill in the trademarks? There's something that we call naked trademark licensing. So are you granting licenses to a trademark without having the ability to monitor the use of the trademark? Remember, trademarks identify the source and the quality of the goods and services. And so you want to make sure that if you're granting others the right to use your trademarks, that you have the ability to monitor the quality of the goods and services that are being associated with your trademarks. We talked about the business strategy and the IP strategy. So remember, IP protection is country by country, right? Jurisdiction by jurisdiction. So looking at where the revenue is coming from for your business, where you anticipate the growth to come from, that is not going to be the only factor, but it is going to be a key factor in how you decide to protect your intellectual property. What intellectual property you're going to protect, and then where it's going to be protected. The other reason why that's important is because IP protection is jurisdiction by jurisdiction, and because you're a startup, you probably don't have a lot of budget, and protecting intellectual property can be expensive. The typical patent application is anywhere from $12,000 to $15,000 at a minimum. And that's for one patent application for one invention in a single jurisdiction. And so you can imagine if you have multiple inventions across multiple jurisdictions, because you're manufacturing in one area in one country and then selling the product in multiple other countries, the dollar figures for patent protection can multiply very, very quickly. And so looking at where the revenue is coming from, where the growth is coming from, can help you manage your budget for intellectual property protection. And so that's why it's just really important to align your IP strategy with your business strategy in a manner that's consistent with preserving your IP rights and IP protection. With that, I'm gonna stop and leave 5 minutes for questions. And let me shift my screen here. So any questions from anyone? Yes, Anthony, I see a hand.
All right, thanks. Hey, appreciate all the briefing. I just had a question more tactically for UC Davis folks. What are maybe some of the resources available to tackle this problem, or as an early stage startup, et cetera? What are some of the resources available to us to help navigate these waters?
Joe, do you want to take that?
Sure, Vicky. Specifically, Anthony, as it comes to intellectual property.
IP and maybe other legal resources that we might have available to us.
Yeah, so the Office of Research, anything that is created, as Vicky mentioned, on campus, using campus resources, campus time, the university has an interest in the intellectual property, and it's a bit of a, in my view, double-edged sword. So the challenge is, you have to go through the university. The advantage is if they view the intellectual property as potentially valuable, they will pay to pursue the patents. Ultimately, then when you go to license it back from the university, they will, they will get their money back, through the license. But typically, they have the opportunity either to pursue or not pursue it. So we can make sure, Nikki and Julianne, that we, provide the links to the appropriate folks to talk to in the Office of Research and Venture Catalyst. But the university has a pretty big commitment to pursuing these. It's just a question of whether intellectual property has, has true viability. And then in terms of funding sources, Venture Catalyst and our colleagues there, and specifically Janine Elliott, who's my counterpart at Venture Catalyst, are pretty skilled at early stage investing. And so for many things coming out of the university, SBIRs are a great no equity, no strings attached way to get funding from the government. If it fits into the right box, it's typically hundreds of thousands to very low $1 million kind of grants, but often is really important fuel early on. And they're essentially no strings attached. You have to deliver against specific commitments that you make. But the government owns no part of your business. You owe no debt, once you go forward. But they also can make connections, and we certainly can be helpful on the sort of angel and VC side. But typically things coming out of the lab, it's a little premature for that. So I don't know if that answered all of your question or part of your question or none of your question.
No, I appreciate it. I think I'm covered. Thanks.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Vicky.
You've got Vicky. She is a global expert. Do not let her go without
So
asking
much.
her. Go.
Yeah, it was very useful information. I appreciate all you did. So my question, or better say questions, the first question is that how do we know the threshold or the line between trade secret and what we are going to patent? I mean, there's this technology that let's say I want to patent it so anyone else cannot use it, but at the same time I feel that okay, if I patent this, there might be some ways to go around it, and my patent will be useless at that point. So how can I deal with this?
Well, that would be a reason to maintain it as a trade secret, right? I mean, the reason why the patents are published is because we want to encourage innovation, right? And so if the desire is that you don't want to give your competitors any clues to design around your patent. That's a viable reason to not pursue patent protection and instead maintain it as a trade secret.
All right. And then there is this saying from several IP lawyers that I've heard that not patenting is better than a bad patent or incomplete patent. What does it mean? How can I make sure that if I'm patenting something, I do it right?
Yeah, so that's really something that is best left to the patent lawyers, to be honest, because a very good patent lawyer will, so there's what we call claims in the patent. And so the best patent lawyers will draft the claims broadly enough to kind of have that fence around your market, right? But not so broad that you run the risk of having the patent declared invalid, right? So that is very much a skill that not all patent lawyers have. And at the same time, you don't want the patent to be too narrow either, right? Because if the patent claims are too narrow, then that's where you run into the problems like you described. The patent gets published, the claims are out there, your patent is narrow, and so you give enough information to your competitors for them to develop a design around more easily because the claims are too narrowly drafted. And so making sure that you find a patent lawyer that not only is experienced generally, but experienced in your technology. So for example, I have colleagues who are very good patent lawyers in the semiconductor space. Those lawyers are not necessarily going to be the same lawyers that I go to for a software client. You really need to have the patent lawyers understand your business and understand the competitive landscape in order for them to be best positioned to draft the claims for a strong patent for you.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Oh, there's some in the chat.
No questions in the chat. It looks like we're almost out of time. So maybe one more question if anybody has one.
I had a question and it's a little scattered, so just bear with me, but it's based off of like, the scenario where, you're a young aspiring entrepreneur and you have, let's say, an idea for software. And, the idea of a perfect competition is like, in America, right, is developing a lot of companies and having them compete with each other so that the best products stand out. So like, what does it look like? Let's say you have an idea for a SaaS software as a service, and there's a few ideas similar to them. And, you're just like an aspiring entrepreneur. So what does the road look like? Let's say if you're developing something similar to what's out there, like let's say Google Maps and Apple Maps, right? And you want to get in the market, like what would you do if you were this, this little undergrad kid who wants to, like how do you navigate the obstacles? How do you know when it's like, okay, the game is over, like I'm surrounded by, behemoths that are going to take me down?
Joe, do you want to take that one?
Well, so we could start with the golden rule, which I mean, I know right? She who has the gold makes the rules. Maybe more broadly, there's two ways of looking at this. But I'd love your perspective on this, Vicky, as well. Clay Christensen, wrote a very famous series of books on technology disruption, and the idea that companies get disrupted often by smaller entities starting at the low end with fewer features, less completeness, whether it's a service or a product or whatever it might be. And these usually are companies, my word's not his. He's exceptional writer. He passed away a few years ago, but his books are fantastic. They're scrappier and have different set of criteria for success. So if you're a large successful company, you've got quarterly earnings reports, you've got margins to maintain, you're judged on a set of things, whether the executive running a division or the CEO or anyone sort of, on the finance side of things. So smaller, scrappier companies, with a lower performing product can come from below and disrupt and ultimately be successful. So one side of the coin is it's perfectly fine competing against the big guys. They certainly have every incentive to come after you, to come after your intellectual property. We have plenty of examples of small companies that get IP and large companies that violate the IP and basically say, hey, just sue me, right? I've got 100 lawyers, you have one or none. Although if the one was Vicky, you'd be fine. You'd win 100 times out of 100. So that's the other side of this, right? Which is, going up against big companies always going to have more resources. Their tolerance for legal issues may be much higher. They may be willing to skirt the edge or even directly violate a patent. Although Vicky will tell you there's huge consequences of doing that. If you do it consciously, it's, the economic penalties can be huge. So that's maybe a long way of saying it really depends, but there are some advantages to being small and nimble and going after a big guy. And there's some, real disadvantages. Does that begin to answer? Vicky, do you want to add or?
Yeah, I would say going up against the behemoths, that's what makes Silicon Valley go around. I mean, right? That's what fuels innovation. So I wouldn't be afraid of doing that. I think the important thing is you just need to have clean hands, because if there's any indication that you worked at Google, you're now going out on your own, you took something from Google on the way out, that they will not hesitate to come after you. If you can leave as I said, if you can leave your current employer, have clean hands, come up with something on your own, that's where you want to be. And I mean, we don't have enough time here, but copyright protection is available theoretically for two identical works of authorship, so long as you don't copy. So Joe could come up with a piece of software, I could come up with a piece of software. If he sits in a room and codes that software on his own, and I sit in a room and code software on my own, and we just happen to come up with the same or similar software, we each can have a valid copyright on that software. The key is that you're not copying, you're not accessing. We don't have access to each other's code in the process of doing that. It's not the same for patents. You can infringe another party's patent even if you're not copying, right? But in the software context, the one key fact is to determining whether or not there's infringement is did you copy it, right? So assuming that you didn't copy it, you go and you develop your map or your software code, your map application. Going back to Joe's presentation, you don't have to. There's different ways of being successful. You don't have to go public. Lots of companies like Google, like Meta, like Tesla, they have a history of acquiring small companies that are scrappy, that are, developing next generation technologies. And you can have a very successful venture just by being acquired by one of those companies. And so that is a perfectly valid business model.
Got it. Yeah, that definitely paints the picture.
Right. The one thing I would keep in mind is if you have the good fortune to end up in a discussion with one of those big companies about either a potential investment or a potential acquisition, they're going to ask you to, you want to make sure you sign a non-disclosure agreement, right? And even if you sign a non-disclosure agreement, to Joe's point, these are big companies that have lots of resources. Are you going to sue a big company if you believe they've violated the non-disclosure agreement? You probably don't have the financial resources to go up against them.
In my experience, yeah, it's almost never.
Right. But what you can do is you can control what information you disclose to them.
Exactly.
So what I often tell my clients is you can tell them what you're doing, just don't tell them how you're doing it. Make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Great. All right, I am going to call it because, Vicky, we've asked a lot of you and really appreciate your time and expertise. And thank you to Nikki and Julianne for hosting and managing the whole process. So any wrap-up words, Julianne?
I just wanted to say that I dropped my email address in the chat. So anyone who's still on, feel free to contact me if you have any questions about Little Bang or Big Bang. And I've also included the link to next week's workshop, Wednesday at 5 o'clock.
Which is Professor H. Do not miss it.
And then my contact information is, I think, buried in towards the end of the slide somewhere. And so, I'm happy to answer questions anytime. Gratis. You don't want to know my hourly rate, but gratis.
Thank you so much. We're always so grateful to have you and your expertise, and we're so grateful for the partnership with DLA Piper.
Yes, of course. So are we.
And Thanks. Go Aggies.
Yep. Okay. Bye.
See you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.